conference, since it's 1:30 or past 1:30, and I apologize for being a few minutes late. We're here to talk today about House Joint Resolution 7, which is a resolution asking for or calling for a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments to the United States Constitution. A little bit of background is necessary. Our Constitution, wonderful document that it is, the first 7 articles basically lays out what the foundation of our government is. Most folks are familiar with the amendments, especially the first 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. But the first 3 articles talk about the legislature, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And Articles 4 and 6, by and large, deal with relationships between the states and individually in the federal government. Article 5 of the United States Constitution is the article which talks about how the Constitution is amended. And there are 2 methods. One is a 2/3 of the United States Congress passes a proposed amendment, and that amendment is then sent out to the states, and 3/4 of the states have to adopt that amendment. And of course, that's been done 27 times throughout our history, or not 27 separate times, but there are 27 amendments to the current, to the U.S. Constitution, and all done by that method, passed through Congress and then out to the states. The other method for amending our Constitution and it is what's called a convention for proposing amendments, and that is done not through the U.S. Congress or not through the federal government, but through the several states. And essentially what the Constitution says is if 2/3 of the state legislatures pass a resolution calling for such a convention, that Congress must, it's not a discretionary thing, Congress must call a convention for that purpose. Congress, by the way, can also dictate whether, and ultimately, before I get too far ahead, ultimately what happens is the convention is held, and that convention then can, if the states at that convention pass an amendment, that amendment would then go out to the states, in 3/4 of the states, and that's 38 states for those who don't have a calculator in their pocket right now. 38 of the states would have to approve of that amendment. And we often talk about the checks and balances in our government, how we have these sort of 3 co-equal branches, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. But this is really the 4th check, and essentially it's a check that the states have on the federal government. And that really was why this was put in this way by the founders. In fact, there's multiple sources for this, but this is probably the most concise. Alexander Hamilton said, "We may safely rely on the disposition of the state legislatures to erect barriers against the encroachment of national authority." He's speaking of this provision in Article 5. That's why it's in there, so that if the federal government becomes overarching or overreaching or is doing something that can't be controlled, the state legislatures have the ability to do something about that. Now, it isn't as though the state legislatures can take a vote and say, don't do this or don't do that. It's an arduous process, as it should be. 2/3 of the state legislatures have to call for the convention, they have to pass an amendment, and then 38 or 3/4 of the states have to agree to that amendment. So these aren't the kind of amendments that are not going to, they must have a wide swath of approval among the public. And that's sort of where we get to the balanced budget amendment.